Welcome to a catalogue of conversations with friends, where we try to explore the complexities of life as we know it. I'm your host and your girl T, and this is Tea Time.
Hello, welcome back. It's my podcast Tea Time, and this is episode 4, I believe. I'm alternating solo podcast episodes and guest episodes, so this will be my second solo episode. My first one actually went better than I expected. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but everyone was super supportive. Thank you all for the lovely messages, and I hope it was an entertaining listen / made you think, that kind of thing. So I'm going to try and keep up the trend, or I'm going to try and keep up the style where I sort of talk about something that I've been thinking about or has been on my mind recently. And I also have my crochet. I'm in the midst of trying to make a leg warmer. This is literally my 5th attempt. I have frogged and made so many of these, but this is a new technique, hence all of the stitch markers. So we'll see how I go. As you can probably tell by the title of today's episode, it's going to be about media literacy, which is not really a concept that I have come across previously, but it's also not as if I don't have media literacy, because once it's explained to you, you kind of understand that you've been doing it hopefully all along. And just for context, in case you aren't familiar with what media literacy is the ability to identify and understand sources of media that you're being exposed to, and what those mediums are trying to convey, what messages are they trying to get you to believe, what techniques are they using to communicate that, and how you basically react to it. It's basically the ability to think critically about things that you see online, in person, in print, everything like that, so that you can make an informed decision. So that's media literacy. And I've been thinking about it because I saw a video of someone who basically had prepared all of these sequences of videos related to the same event. So he would say I'm going to take my bike out for a bike ride. Look at me in my bike gear. And then it would be another clip of him in the same gear, same hairstyle and get up and everything. And he would say, okay, I'm in the garage now. I'm going to take my bike out to take it for a ride. And then he's on top of a hill, sweaty. And he's now I've decided to go for a run, and I've run all the way up this hill. Or did I drive up here? And then he'll be in the car and he'll be sweaty. He'll be okay, this is me post-run, post-bike. Or was this filmed on a different day? How would you know? And he basically uses all of these cues to explain that the human brain is really, really good at filling in the gaps. So you see this phenomenon most commonly when you see negative images where it's just black and white, and it's just the item shown but in negative. So instead of the silhouette of it is black, everything else is black, and you just see what should be there. So the panda logo, that's really common. That one is a perfect example of what you mean. You don't see the panda's body because it's all white, but your brain just understands that based on the patterns and the shapes that it sees, that that's supposed to be a panda. And the brain is really good at doing that for other things. Obviously, it has this ability to associate disparate pieces of information and create a story out of it or contextualize it itself, because it's much easier for it to process in batches like that, as opposed to discriminate every single piece of information that it gets on its own with no context. But on the flip side, the downside of that is that makes you really, really prone to misinformation, because your brain basically does all of the misunderstanding itself. You can see sequences of footage or videos that are taken somewhat related to each other, and it will just assume that what it's not seeing, the in-between shots of, traveling in a car or getting stuff ready, it will just assume that it's happened in the correct time frame as well. And that's why, obviously, the concept that everything you see online is not real, or not everything you see online is how it is in real life. That's why that kind of thing applies. And yet it is still so easy to fall into this trap of knowing someone who has a really glamorous life online, or even YouTubers, and assuming that what you see is the reality. And now that I'm doing YouTube and making vlog content and stuff, I know firsthand how selective people can be with that kind of content and what they want people to see. It's very Ella Fitzgerald vis-a-vis Ocean's 11, if you've seen it and you know what that means, or you've seen Mike's video about Ocean's 11, how it's the same as a girls' night out. Great video, you should go watch it. You will know what I'm talking about. It's basically making sure that people see what you want them to see. So what that meant is from that point onwards, I started thinking, I guess, more critically about some of the things I've been hearing, and I can't help but notice examples that I'm seeing around in my life of media literacy in play, or when you might want to think more critically about stuff, especially in this information age and technology and mass media. It's just, I think, controlling media or controlling the way that people see things and understand things is more powerful and more important than anything, because influencing people means influencing the culture, means influencing society, our values, where we go from here. All of that is so crazy important to the direction of humanity. So let's go through some examples of the things that I've seen since I saw this video, and also this video will be linked in the description, that I kind of feel like, ooh, a little bit of critical thinking should have been applied earlier on in this. And now I'm sort of on this side quest where I want to think critically about more things that I hear and see and question where they come from. But we'll start off with like something super simple. If we're going to go on the scale of like very obvious misinformation all the way to very nuanced misinformation, and just bear in mind when I say misinformation, I don't necessarily mean like misinformation with nefarious purposes. Like it's not always, like politically driven or anything. It could literally just be like misleading, and that is all. And also I want to clarify, because it is quite relevant when we think about media is the plural term of medium, and medium is just a vehicle with which a message can be conveyed. So like it's an extremely broad term that can cover anything from the things that you know as media, like newspaper, TV, radio, all the way down to like text messages that you've been sent, not just from establishments, but from like friends, people that you know, conversations that you might have with people. What are the things that they're saying to you? That's a medium technically. Obviously like advertisements that you don't intend to see. So when you're doom scrolling or mindlessly scrolling and it's playing in the background, like any sort of media that you're exposed to, that counts. So it's not necessarily things that you're like intentionally consuming. All right, let's go through on a scale of easy to spot misinformation through to very nuanced types of misinformation. The clearest example, obviously, we've all seen this and hopefully not been victim to it, is phishing scams. This is where people will try to send you a misleading email with false information to then obtain your personal information and or scam you out of money. That generally, depending on how sophisticated the scammer is, will be relatively easy to spot. It's usually poorly worded, grammatically incorrect, or just obviously false. There are other more sophisticated scammers who will find new ways always of tricking people and stealing their money, but generally when we talk about phishing, most people know what phishing emails look like. If we move a little bit further up the scale, you can maybe think about, and this comes in a range as well, but when we talk about the news and reporting, obviously reporting is never 100% factual and unbiased, especially with some of the things happening in the news right now. I've seen a lot of analysis of the power that words have and the way that certain events are being reported on, and newspapers whose titles or contents are being edited periods of time after they were published. Things like that, thinking critically about how information is being conveyed and phrased and what times they're released in coincidence of what other events that are going on, to what purpose. Those kinds of things can sometimes escape you just because you're not intentionally scrutinizing every piece of news that's coming across your feed or in your inbox, but it is something that sometimes can be easier to spot. Not every single biased piece of news article is going to be like Sky News. I will say there is biased reporting on both sides. It's not just like yellow journalism is only for people who are conservatists. There is sensationalism in both sides of reporting. It's harder to identify if it's a point of view that you agree with. It might seem a little bit extremist, but you don't necessarily feel like they're just pulling information out of thin air, because it's a field or an area that you have much more experience with and exposure to. Now, if we get into the nitty-gritty of what are some much more niche examples where media literacy plays a bigger role, I have a few banked up and I'll take you through each of these. there is a chance that you have heard of some of these things that are happening because it is mainstream pop culture. But I want to hear about if you thought about any of these topics of discussion more critically in the way that I'm about to dive into it. And I also want to preface by saying I don't have all of the answers. This is more of like a, I wonder what, maybe it's like this. These are the things that I'm thinking about. It doesn't mean I'm like speaking 100% of the truth because I don't have firsthand experience to these things. Like I wasn't there. I don't know these people. I don't know these events. But if I was to think critically about them, these are some of the questions that I might think about. The first one, it's a little bit more in the past, but I'm sure many of you knew about the Oppenheimer movie that came out. Great movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. Christopher Nolan never misses. Wins an Oscar. Spoiler alert, I think it might have won many Oscars. Rightfully so. It was a masterpiece. But I did see a lot of online discourse about the fact that it is about the nuclear bomb and it doesn't necessarily highlight the destruction or the aftermath of, I've done too many stitches. 1 second. Okay, we're back on track. Changing different stitches is not my forte when I'm yapping at the same time. So, yeah, Oppenheimer, the movie doesn't necessarily focus or revolve around the destruction of the nuclear bomb and the devastation that it brought to some of its victims, like Japan. And some people have taken issue with the fact that it might romanticize the nuclear bomb because it is a very well-made film that sort of explores the life and brilliance of the father of the nuclear bomb. And it's also like a very westernized view of the invention, whereas some other countries may see it differently. And I've seen discourse on the other side of this where people have said that it does reflect in the movie the devastation that it caused Oppenheimer as well, like the way that he basically realized by the end of the movie like what he had done, like opened Pandora's box, released it into the world, and he could never take it back. And he obviously suffered mentally and emotionally as a result as well. However, I do understand how that could go over some people's heads because it is quite like a critical analysis that you need to do in order to get to that point. And if you compare that to Studio Ghibli's Grave of the Fireflies, which is, I guess, the other side of the story, that's not to say both films are trying to trick you. They're both wonderful films made by great people, and they obviously carry a message within themselves that the director and the creators of the movie wanted to convey. But it's thinking about, like, when you're watching a movie or a TV show, like, what is the original creator trying to express in this medium or in this media, and what techniques are they using in order to get that across to its audience and influence them, and how do I feel about that? What choice do I want to make about how I feel about this? So that's kind of what I'm getting at when I talk about like media literacy in terms of the media that you consume and the way that it is quite ubiquitous in your life. Because, okay, you could say Oppenheimer is just one movie, it's not that big a deal, but how many movies have you seen in the past month? How many TV shows have you watched? What are the underlying messages or biases that exist in those pieces of media? Are you aware of those things when you're watching them, or do you reflect on them at all? Or are they just maybe things that you might unconsciously adopt or internalize without even really analyzing it critically? That's the kind of thing that over time establishes roots in the psyche of society, where a society like Western versus Eastern will adopt it as a norm. Like, I was talking to my parents recently about the way that parenting is changing in different societies, and they, obviously coming from China, have always long held the understanding that, in at least back when they were younger, that Eastern societies have a much stronger influence over their children's lives, which is why, you know, a lot of Asian kids will end up pursuing careers that their parents wanted them to do, or dating the kind of person that their parents wanted them to have. Whereas a lot of Western societies, especially like younger generations, are more inclined to parent in a way where it encourages youths and younger adults to pursue their own decisions in life and to have life experiences, even if that means making mistakes. And that's not to say like that's exactly the way it is in all of Asia or in all of the Western society, and there's no Asian parents that allow kids to make their own decisions and vice versa. But it is like a inherent difference that exists in those societies for some people, and you might know someone that falls within the category of either one of those. You might be someone who falls into the category of either one of those. But when you are in that society and those values that they hold exist as a result of things like the influence of media and the portrayal of certain behaviors and actions and values in media. So it's like the echo chamber effect, I guess, where if you hold a value as true and everyone around you repeats the same sentiment, you are more inclined to think that it is the correct one or the only true one because you don't ever hear any dissonance. But it's sometimes because you're not exposed to necessarily enough people that are able to broaden your horizons or open you to more perspectives. Another example is if you have recently heard of Ballerina Farm online. I don't think she's as relevant anymore. I'm not sure, but she was really, really big for like a millisecond on internet time recently. And if you don't know who Ballerina Farm is, the short version is basically that she is a traditional wife influencer, which is a style of influencer that focuses on being a traditional housewife. So generally they are people who are wives with children and their job is to be a stay-at-home mom, and they make content around traditionalist wife values and activities like cooking and cleaning, usually with this aesthetic of doing things from scratch as well. So sometimes they'll own a farm and they'll like make food from scratch, or they'll harvest their own produce and garden and things like that and have livestock. So that's basically Ballerina Farm. And she got a lot of attention online because there was an article written about her. So she's married to a man and they have, I believe, 9 children together. And there was an article that was written about her where she was interviewed, I think. They basically asked her about her dreams and her passions as a young woman. And she had originally come from a Mormon background and studied ballet at Juilliard. And she left before she graduated Juilliard to basically get married to her husband and start becoming a traditional wife. I think her husband is also Mormon, I'm not sure. But the interviewer asked her if she would still want to be a ballerina or if that dream is still something she's holding on to. And she, I think, might have given a response that was a little bit like in lamentation, like, oh, I was a good ballerina. And the internet kind of lost their minds collectively over it because they felt like she was maybe being taken advantage of by her husband, who had convinced her to give up on her dream when she was young, basically, of being a ballerina, and that he may be controlling her or potentially abusing her in certain ways, like financially. And people were just generally pretty concerned for her. However, I did see this analysis where someone basically said that during all of this hubbub, Ballerina Farm, I think, never really came out with her own statement. It was just kind of like online chatter between other people. And then when she did come out with a statement, I think there was a video, but people were very concerned that her husband was talking a lot. And she started posting on Instagram again with the call out of like sharing her full story on her website or something. And people were basically suggesting that maybe all of this was a PR stunt. And we'll get to PR in general later on. But yeah, basically a PR stunt for her to get more exposure to people outside of her normal audience. All I have to say on that is, if it is true, man, that's the kind of thing you need to think about when you're looking at content online anymore. Is all of this real? Which feels so dystopian. Like, you wouldn't think you would get to the point where you see stuff online of people's stories and content and have to question, is this something that's real, or maybe it's something that's made up for attention? Like, we've gotten to that point. I personally don't really get involved that much in this kind of online drama because, one, it doesn't affect me or involve me in any way. There's no need to get worked up over something that's like 1,000 miles away from you, and also you have no influence or bearing on. And I also was just kind of like, you don't know the full story. Like, my friend sent me a video of her husband's account where he had uploaded a video of her with one of her children. She was carrying the baby. She was walking across their farmland to him, but she came across a goose. And you know, geese can get really aggressive. I've heard that they're very scary, and it basically was showing aggression to her, like it was doing that thing where it was putting its neck out. And she freaked out, and she, some would say, kicked the goose. She did, I would say, kick the goose in the head, but the goose's neck was very tensile. It kind of just like went with it. It wasn't like a, you know, where two opposing forces are meeting in the middle. So I don't know how high the impact of it was. But My friend got pretty worked up on it, being like, she's a terrible person, how can you kick a goose? And I was kind of thinking like, okay, I feel like we're looking at this through a certain lens. Like if you look at it objectively without the context of Ballerina Farm, whatever, if you are carrying a child and a wild animal comes at you, I don't think it's in any of our positions to tell someone how to react in a self-preservation kind of way. Like there might be some people out there saying it's just a goose, it's not that big a deal, you shouldn't have to use that kind of force. But talk to people who are afraid of birds, and I feel like it might trigger some fight or flight reactions in some people. Some people, flight, definitely, they'll just run away from it, there's no violence. But some people have a fight instinct, and I don't know, I just feel like it was a little bit harsh. And then I also said, look, she's not the one who uploaded this video. He uploaded this video of her. What is he trying to achieve by sharing a video of her like this? Like if everyone on the internet is watching this video and they're having this kind of reaction to her, surely he knew that this could be a potential outcome. So what is he trying to achieve by posting a video that makes her look like this, you know? And that's kind of, I think, the kind of thinking you need to apply in certain situations, especially when it's a rage bait. What is it that I'm being shown? Why are they showing me this? What techniques might they be using as part of this piece of content? What are they trying to achieve? Sometimes it's engagement. Like any engagement is engagement. So it's kind of things like basically that. I also one time saw an interview with this content creator. I don't remember their name anymore, but I think they make like mini inventions every day or something like that. And he was asked about whether or not he sometimes makes mistakes on purpose, because I think there was one invention he made that was like a card holder, and he said there was like a card for every day of the month or every day of the week, or it was like a collective number that's not a common number. You have to like go and calculate it, and he said it was a number less than it actually was. Like he said 63, and someone in the comments came in and said, well, actually it's 64 days in that period of time. And he was asked by the interviewer, did you make that mistake by accident or did you say the wrong number on purpose? And he kind of like was a little coy about it. And he said, oh, well, you know, like any engagement is good engagement. Like he didn't say no, you know what I mean? And that's when I'm kind of like, oh, damn, literally nothing you see online is real. Nothing you see online can be 100% trusted to be real. You can 99% think that it might be real, but always retain the doubt and don't be surprised if something turns out to not be real, because chances are, if there is a really good piece of content online, there is someone behind that piece of content with their own biases, their own mission, their own goals that they're trying to achieve. And some of the best content creators are very media literate. So don't be surprised if you turn around one day and find out that your favorite YouTuber has actually been using strategies and techniques to get your views that's not 100% truthful or authentic, but it's just part of their job. And that's all it is a job that they're working and they're really good at and they get paid for. Okay, our next example is something that is a little bit more pertinent recently. And if you haven't heard about this, you don't have to be across the details, but if you haven't heard about this, you may have been living under a rock, because it's literally all anyone can talk about, which all I can say to that is PR is working. But it's the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni drama specifically. Not just the Blake Lively, whatever is going on there, but specifically the drama between her and Justin Baldoni. And this is one of those moments where when I saw this analysis, I was like, yes, of course, I'm such a fool. But as part of, I think, some of the allegations that have come out between the two parties, there have been speculation as to why they don't get along. And obviously everyone loves to point fingers and try and figure out who is at fault, because there always has to be someone at fault, right? It's never just two people don't get along. Someone has to be the bad guy, not just like two people are just different and that's just the way life is sometimes. But I think the timeline of events goes approximately as news breaks out that Blake and Justin are not getting along, they're not doing press together or something, and they're not doing interviews together, stuff like that. And they keep going back and forth on the reason why. And then one of them was like, people were saying, oh, Justin Baldoni is like a huge feminist, and Blake didn't want the movie to be as centered around domestic abuse as Justin wanted to. So it's like creative differences in that way, but obviously that like doesn't reflect well on Blake. And then Blake came out with the revelation that she was fat shamed by Justin Baldoni or something along the lines of that. And then obviously all of this other stuff about Blake being a mean girl, like being mean to the interviewers, came out after. And you might be getting trickles of this information online, you know, here and there, and just hearing it, being like, oh, this is how it's developed, and you're talking about it with your friends. But it was brought to my attention that this is literally what PR agencies do. Like, this is what PR teams do as a job. This is their professional day job, which is make sure that the general public or the people that they're trying to influence receive the right information at the right time. If you are finding out something about this dude that is new, you are not finding out, you're not getting the inside scoop. It's in the mainstream already, first of all, but you are hearing this information because they want you to know this information at this specific time. So like, why is it so convenient? Like, if you think about Joe Jonas and Sophie Turner, when they got divorced, there was all of this back and forth of information. And it was basically their two PR teams trying to make the other person look bad. So first it was like, Sophie's an irresponsible mother. She's going out partying, even though her baby is still at home. And then it was, Joe was never around. He was a bad father. He never supported Sophie in raising their child. Like, all of this stuff. And it would just go like ping pong. Like, one team would release information that defames the other, and then the other team would retaliate, so that when they go to court, basically that the popular mainstream audience is behind one of them more than the other, and their career can continue to flourish and not get basically nosedived. And like, you don't think about this on a day-to-day basis, so you don't apply it all the time when you hear about news, but so much of what you see and what you hear is orchestrated for you to see and hear exactly when and where and how you actually see it. And it's so existential to think about how you are just in the matrix and you're being fed information. You think you have free will, you think you have your own critical thought, but you don't actually, because nothing is real. It's kind of one of those moments when I realized this about the drama. And also I was kind of like, I don't really care. Someone asked me if I was going to go watch the movie, and I was like, literally the drama makes me want to watch the movie less. I know for some people they're like, oh, now I have to watch the movie because I have to know what happens and like why they didn't get along, and if the acting held up in the movie, or if you can tell that they hate each other, like that kind of thing. But I'm like, all of this drama is so off-putting. It's just like one big pissing contest. And I know that none of it is real. I just want to understand, like, deep down between the two parties, what actually happened and how they actually feel, because I don't even know if they want to reconcile, or if it's just like the PR teams are like, we can't back down now. We've gone too far. Like, we have to commit. I've also heard people say that Hailey Bailey's whole let them eat cake debacle that happened on TikTok, that was just a PR stunt as well. It's just because we live in this age where any engagement is good engagement, and so even if it was an accident, you could always play it to your advantage in that way, which is just so sad when we think about like the loss of intentional artistry and things like that in society. It's now just like some kind of laser-focused, attention-grabbing, drama-capitalizing, profiteering machine. And it's really, really hard to feel regulated in that kind of environment, because it's almost like you hear things and you can never really truly be sure if it's real or not. And that's not to say you can't like turn off your brain and enjoy some TV, some mindless content and relax. It's just not all the time. You can't be doom scrolling and mindlessly consuming media all the time. That can't be your hobby. Your hobby can't be just consuming media. That really can't be the direction that society is going in, because if so, when the world ends, it's not going to be because of AI. It's going to be because of media literacy and lack thereof. And the craziest part is, it might be easy to say like, oh, but these are just one-off examples. They're just, things that have happened, but it's not that big a deal. It's not that deep, right? Like, they're just things that have happened. We'll forget about them. It's not like it's going to change the world. No, maybe not these things, but if you think about things that are already ingrained in our society, there are people and corporations and intention behind the media that we consume, and in the entertainment that we see and the messages that we hear. And those things have an impact, and you see it in the way that our society manifests in its culture and the values that we hold. So media literacy is just the first step to being able to step out of the matrix and see things from an outsider perspective, because sometimes it's actually not something that you think you agree with it, or you think you believe in it, but you actually don't, and it's only because you've never considered it from another perspective before. I actually really enjoy thinking about topics or discussion points from like a very philosophical way, where it's kind of like you're in this limbo space where there's no right or wrong. There is just what perspectives can you bring to the table, and you look at something objectively and say, okay, but like how would you be able to determine what's right or wrong? Like right and wrong is just basically what society has deemed as right and wrong. But what happens if both parties think the other party is corrupt? Who actually is the good guy? And you get that in a lot of like morally ambiguous films and books and TV shows and different forms of literature and media. But it's not always explored because it is really complex, and it often leaves you pretty unsatisfied because there is no answer. It is just a discussion for you to explore and think about. Whereas so many TV shows, like I'm watching Criminal Minds right now, and they say this so often, but they're like, oh, we saved the girl, but 2 people are dead. And then the cops, the good guys, will say, well, at least they were bad guys. And I'm just like, how can it be that black and white? Like, you guys literally know what they went through. Like, life is almost never like that. And I've been thinking recently, watching Criminal Minds, about how, like, even if someone is evil or if they've done terrible, terrible things, they still deserve compassion the same way that like any person deserves compassion, not because they deserve it, but because everyone deserves compassion. Like if they hurt themselves and people say like, oh, you deserved it because you were a bad person. And it's like, what deems a bad person in absolute terms like that? How do you know how much suffering someone deserves because of what they've done? Like, what if no amount of action can equate deserving suffering, because no one deserves suffering? Like, how would that work? Just questions like that, you know? Thoughts like that keeping me busy. If you have some time, I really recommend that kind of thought exercise, because it's really interesting and you'll literally never be bored, even if you're trapped somewhere where you can't leave and it's just you and your thoughts. Like, I do this all the time, and it's really philosophical, but it's really interesting, and you always come away thinking about something that you've never thought about before, and I think it's a good exercise in mental flexibility as well. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today in terms of media literacy. I'm still new to it. I did a lot of research before I made this because I didn't want to say anything wrong, but if you know something that I don't, or if I said something wrong, please correct me, let me know. I'm always looking to update my understanding of things. I'm very open to discussion and like learning from other people, but that's kind of what's been on my mind recently, and I'm hoping now it's going to be something that's on yours. And by the time my next solo podcast episode is up, I hope you will be a little bit more media literate, and you will have come across your own examples of the Oppenheimer versus Grave of the Fireflies, or Ballerina Farm, or the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni drama. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you have a topic or a guest that you want to see on this podcast, please let me know, reach out, leave a comment. All of the above are very, very welcome. And I will see you all in 2 months' time. Bye!